Nick Hines, a Sarge, reporting for duty, and welcome to another edition of the Wednesday Works brought to you by My Racehorse, ladies and gentlemen. A live show here in this midweek. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed a happy Valentine's Day with your significant other. As we march on, I want to welcome in once again my good friend and the California West Coast racing manager, West Coast California race, just a guy that does just about everything that most people don't realize. My friend Joe, how are you on this fine day?
I'm pretty good. How about you? I don't know if I missed it or not, but did we start with the tent hut or did we leave that out today?
I started with the reporting for duty.
Okay, all right. I was kind of waiting for it. I thought it was coming, and it didn't quite come. I was a little disappointed there. Maybe next week.
Yeah, I feel like you're in a different place, and you probably are, but it's almost heaven-like. I mean, nice to see you, my friend.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
All right. Well, we've got another exciting show for you, and once again, I want to remind the folks out there that are tuned in that this is an interactive show. So if you've got some questions or thoughts, of course, that particular person behind the scenes, you all knew she is the hostess with the mostest, all things social, Hannah. She will kind of post up those questions as well, and we appreciate any feedback, any thoughts you may have, and of course, any questions that we may be able to answer for you. And, an exciting week, and prefacing this show by, well, we're going to touch on edge racing, Joe, something that has come about over the course of the past few months, and excited about edge racing. We're going to introduce a horse into this work show by the name of Yes This Time. But let's get started. And as we follow through today, we're doing something that we haven't done and actually have a scorecard, if you will, a report card. Neither Joe or myself know exactly what grades we gave each one of these individuals. So let's jump right into it. And the California-based horse Carpe Vinum, as she continues her progression off of that big effort in the Astra, where she, I thought, ran a much better than looked fifth with a career best speed figure. What did she do this past week from a work perspective?
Yeah, so she went 5/8, and talking to trainer Phil D'Amato, this was kind of, she had an easy 3/8 2 weeks ago, an easy half. This 5/8 was really to kind of put us in the position to be ready for a race. So now she's kind of at the point where she's fit, ready to go whenever that race comes up, and you'll see it here. She worked in company with, I'm going to mess up this name, Rakasha. And she's a good allowance sprinter. She is a sprinter. She's not the biggest of sorts that she worked with. But this was what I would say is a better than average work for Carpe Venom. You'll see here turning for home. She was always traveling comfortably. She always gets a little nudged along, definitely when she works in company. But, I was here on site watching this work. And when I saw Rakasha come alongside her, I really thought she was going to go right on by us. And I thought Carpe Venom kicked on nicely by herself. And you'll see here, she's striding out nicely. And when she hits the wire, she gallops out really well. So I would say for her, this was an above average work for Carpe Venom.
And would you say that, when you talk Carpe Vinum as a workhorse, would you say she is about average, or is she above average as far as
I would say average at best. I mean, she's never been one that, she'll never catch your eye or do anything that really gets you super motivated. But she's one of those horses that shows up in the afternoon every time she tries really hard. And Hannah, if you can let the gallop out go here, you'll see she just kicks on right past the wire. And she's kind of got that steady one pace. She doesn't really quite want to quicken, but she'll stay that one pace for quite some time. And ultimately, that's what led us, for wanting to reach for a race with some extra ground for her.
Yeah, and you note her type of action. We often relay it to daisy cutter action, where she has that that knee type action, which is more geared toward turf. You can watch her off the tip of the turn here with the shadow roll and blinkers, which is the standard equipment. What would you say the reasoning is for blinkers and a shadow roll in most cases?
Well, I would say she's a little bit of a higher strung, quirky, a little bit of a horse. So it keeps her more, focused to her task ultimately for her in particular. And that's going to be your biggest thing with the blinkers. It's just keeping that attention with everything ahead and keeping everything on task.
All right. So nothing that was, out of the ordinary here. Pretty straightforward drill. If I were to add anything, I personally think Carpe Venom is better suited off of a workmate, or she may have a target. But I get Phil's reasoning here as obviously applying a little bit of pressure to put a little more attention into her game. Her Casa, by the way, she's had 8 career starts to win 4 seconds. You mentioned still has that A other than condition, but she's certainly talented.
Yep.
And, we often like to see horses that breeds with other horses that have exhibited talent in the afternoon to give us some indication of what we're dealing with. So her last race that she had, Carpe Venum, was on the 17th of January, that 5th place showing. Interesting to note when you look at the weights that she weighed in March 7th of last year at 1,036 pounds. In January, she weighed in at 1,080. So I found that pretty fascinating. Not uncommon because, she's gone from a 3 to a 4-year-old essentially, but she's had 3 works since the race on January 17th. This is her first 5/8 back. Is she targeting any particular race at this juncture?
Yeah, not at this point. I talked to Phil right after this work. He's still really pushing hard to get, in his perfect world would be getting a 1.25 mile race written on the turf for her at that allowance level that she would be eligible to other than allowance. We also have talked about Golden Gate, possibly looking for a race up there. There is a mile race. We still would like a little extra ground, but, going up there, Phil thinks she would be ultra competitive, but the target would be ideally staying here at first. And then if we can't get a race here, maybe we'd consider going up there as well.
All right. So she continues working back toward a potential race, ideally to find that 1.1 miles and beyond, perhaps even at that marathon. 1.25 miles would be, I think, an ideal distance for her, right?
Well, you've seen it even with the boys. We're going to touch on it real quick. You saw, I believe it was to start the year. It might have been the first of the year for the boys' condition race. There was 1.25 miles. So they will ride it. It's just a matter of getting it to get put in there. So it'll be interesting if Phil can work some magic.
Right, and she is already ascended through that first level allowance, so she'll need to find what is deemed as a twice other than. Okay, so staying in line with our California-based horses, let's take a look at Tizamagician as far as his most recent effort. As you well know, the Grade 2 San Pasquale, quite a gallant effort there with a track that was labeled as good. This would be his first workout back since that January 30th. What are we saying here?
Yeah, easy 3/8, and you'll see him just striding along easy as can be. You watch the rider the whole time. I mean, like a statue. And being out there for this work, he couldn't have done it easier. And this was just simply what we would call maintenance mode, getting him back in the swing of things, and he's going to start picking it up here. But love the way that he's traveling. He's a happy horse. And he's just cruising along in the zone is what I'll say. I saw him galloping yesterday. He's a horse that's in the zone, and I see the same thing in this work, right? Focus at task.
Well, the one thing I can appreciate, and this is no discredit to Carpe Vinum because these are horses of their own ilk and their own, characteristics, right? They all have their own personalities. Yeah. And the one thing I can take from this work is when I see equipment stripped. I don't see blinkers. I don't see shadow rolls. I don't see figure eights. I see a horse that, again, with no equipment, it's reminiscent of, say, for example, Mike Tyson when he came to the ring and he just had the black trunks, black shoes, no robe, and he was ready to knock somebody out. So when you think Mandela and you kind of relate off of the fact that he just won a race at the distance of, 1.8 miles, what's the thought process just coming back with a 3 furlong drill? I mean, you would think that he could do this backwards.
Yeah, well, I think being the target race being on March 6th and that he'll have 2 more works from here, this was just to get him back in the swing of things. He's plenty fit. He's had 2 races from that, twice other than allowance race, the San Pasquale. The fitness is there. He's a horse that he trains in the morning. That's, touching on having no equipment. I think if you saw this horse in blinkers, he would be super headstrong. He pulls, Taylor Camber rides him. He's probably one of the stronger gallop boys in the barn. And there's days where Tiz is feeling himself. He'll be pulling along there. So I just think it's a horse that he trains himself in the mornings. He gallops strong where he doesn't truly need to do much more than this at this stage of the game. But as we get closer to that race, you'll start seeing him prep up. I imagine in the next day or two, we'll see him come back on the work tab, and we'll see probably a 5/8 work here next.
So in a partnership with Spendthrift Farm, Tizamagician, 14 career starts, 3 wins, 6 seconds, multiple graded stakes, earnings in excess of $219,000. So you mentioned the fact that target is the San Anita Handicap, the date March 6th. likely 2 more workouts prior to that. So I would imagine things will get a little more serious. And, of course, we'll have that next workout, barring any unforeseen circumstances. We will mention the fact that Naismith, we weren't able to get him on film, although you and I were standing there, and I know you were trying to adjust your phone. But as far as XBTV, making that call to be sure going forward we get these horses locked up so we can show them on our Wednesday work show.
Absolutely. But yeah, Naismith, it was a nice solid 3/4 drill out of the gate again. So hopefully he'll be entering tomorrow for that race, but the work went well, and Richard Mandela had some positive thoughts, got him to relax. We talked about it on the last show. He's a horse that's pretty headstrong in the mornings, and I would say it was probably he's progressed each week, and that was his best work of the series of drills leading up to that race.
All right, Judy Newman, today's big question. I like that. I like the big questions. Horse conformity. What do you look for in a turf horse versus a dirt horse, and long distance runner versus sprinter? What book do you recommend? First of all, I'll defer to you on the first part of the question. As far as conformation books, I can have an answer for that.
Oh, well, yeah, you would have the book for me. I don't have the book. But you could say, and this is actually, I'm going to say this, I've had a lot of conversations with trainers, and, talking to Richard Mandela, I always like to pick his brain, and he'll talk a lot about, turf horses versus dirt horses. Feet is a big thing when you see a horse's foot. Usually, maybe if I'm saying it correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a flatter foot's probably going to be, a little more beneficial for the turf. And also a slopier pastern angle is going to be more of a tendency for that turf course as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, when it comes to horse conformation, for me, there are so many books out there, and there's no such thing as a bad horse conformation book. I think there was one that Ben Green had put out. There are books that actually date back. Like if you go back to the conformation books of, say, the 60s and 70s, I think they're every bit as good as what's been printed today. Because the one thing about the horse, while they have evolved in the breed, they haven't necessarily changed from a physical standpoint. But, we kind of alluded to the knee action, Joe. That's one thing when we're at the 2-year-old training sales, or we're going to try and privately acquisition a horse. You kind of look for that in their movement generally. Now, I look for those horses that may not be as straight up and down, because when you look at the conformation from the point of which you go to the knee to the ankle down through the pastern, you're looking for that perfect 90-degree angle. But you definitely don't want to have horses that are a little bit more like a pogo stick. So I like to have that little bit of a bend, but not break. When you're looking at a horse from a conformation standpoint, you certainly don't want to have a horse that's back at the knee. It just puts too much pressure, in particular on the bottom joint. I mean, balance is everything. As far as turf horses go, they tend to come in all shapes and sizes. I mean, generally turf horses, they can have a bit of a lighter hip. The sprinter type horses, they have the bigger, more musculature hip, a big, longer hip, so to speak. But, I've seen turf horses made that way as well. But sometimes when you get horses that are in training and you look at them from a physical standpoint, big shoulder, not much of a hip, a trainer will say he's probably a grass horse because he doesn't have enough strength throughout his hip to handle the dirt. So as far as long back, short back, for me, I think the sprinters generally are shorter backed, close coupled. When you go withers to the croup area, shorter distance and range. Kind of that's the perspective that I take there. Anything you want to add there, Joe?
I mean, I think you covered a lot right there in a short period of time. So I can't one up you on that one.
Yeah, and I think the other point is when you think sprinter, generally you're looking for horses that are shorter cannoned. Horses from the knee to the ankle, shorter distance, stretchier, rowdier turf types, a longer bone. I think sprinters in general, I think sprinting is harder on a horse, and I've always believed that, and I think most will tell you that because the several thousand pounds per square inch they hit versus a horse that's going longer. But that makes sense in any case. If I took you outside, Joe, and I said, hey, I want you to sprint as fast as you can for 20 yards versus, hey, I want you to run 200 yards, you might get a little tired at the end of the 200. But if you have to go as fast as you can for the 20 to 50 yards, it's going to be it'll be harder on your legs.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of that depends on, timing too. So Judy, thank you for that. Hopefully we didn't kind of essentially go too prolonged. It is a wonderful fascination that I've had because as far as conformation and books, there are so many out there. And
maybe it's something we could talk about. It would be good to throw some graphics out there because it's hard. I'm sure a lot of people, when they're hearing you say the terms you're saying, it would be good. Maybe on one of our My Racehorse live shows, we pull up some pictures and break it down a little bit more.
Sure. Good. Yeah, and I think the key is when you're looking at a horse, it's like putting a puzzle together. So if you had a puzzle of a horse's, say for example, withers to their head to withers to the croup to the tail. It's just imagine putting a piece and saying, wow, that horse's neck looks like it's too short, or that horse's hip looks really small, or hey, that horse's shoulder doesn't match with its balance. And that's obviously what we strive for when we're at the sales. Okay. The hardest part, though, I will say, and Joe, you know darn well because we've been in the trenches together, has been the yearlings, because the yearlings haven't really been tested, right? We're basing a walk, we're basing it on how they're made, and then we're reflecting on the pedigree. But for me, it's the psyche, and obviously, intuitively, if you walk up to a horse, it's much like a person, and you don't have an easy feeling. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person. It doesn't mean it's a bad horse, but chances are you probably want to move on to the next one because if you have to stand there for X amount of time and kind of mesh with the process, it's generally not good. Especially when you're at a Keeneland yearling sale and there's 4,300 horses to look at.
No doubt, makes it hard. And you got to use your imagination to really see what those yearlings are going to turn into a year from there. When you talk about balance, at least in the 2-year-old sales, you got a lot more. They've been a lot further along in the training. Where a yearling, you gotta imagine what they're going to turn into a year from that point. So it definitely makes it a lot more difficult at that point.
I mean, in reality, it's much like, for example, let's say you're a college recruiter. Let's say you're Nick Saban and his staff. You go to the home of an 8-year-old, and you're like, hey, so have you played a lot of sports? Well, we started playing football a year ago. You're going to assess at that stage of the game, and that's a hard thing to do. Whereas you go their junior year in high school, double the age. Now you have a good idea. I mean, it's again, there are pros and cons to both ends of the spectrum. If you're just joining us, this is the Wednesday Work Show brought to you by My Racehorse. This is a live interactive show. I am Nick Hines, the Sarge. Some of you may know me on TVG, of course, working as a racing advisor with My Racehorse, along with Joe Moran, our California racing manager. And moving on. Okay, so we've got a couple in the books here. Let's move on to Daddy's Joy. And I know that she's been on deck trying to get into a race for several weeks now. I mean, her last race was December 12th? Since that time, she's had a total of 6 workouts. This was her most recent drill, I believe, that we have on February 13th, correct?
Correct. Yeah. February 13th, she went in company on the inside with a stablemate going a half mile. It's been unfortunate since we've had to enter about, I want to say 8 or so times that we've entered from the last condition book till now. But here you'll see her. She's a horse that we've seen her get a little wet in the mornings. But personally, I thought this was one of her better works that we've seen of late. And I was especially impressed by the way she kicked on when we hit the final 8th. We'll see her when she comes around this turn at that green pole, the 8th pole. You'll see she kind of pins her ears back, gets real competitive, and I thought she strided on nice late. So for me, this was one of her better works that I've seen of late, and I think she's leading up well to this race. She's the morning line 7-5 favorite, and you'll see her right here. She kind of kicked it into another gear and strided on nice.
All right, we're going to have an opportunity to take a look at this work again. And just to kind of give you some semblance on the actual workout, her most recent drill prior to this was February 6th. It was a 49.3. She's stationed at Palm Meadows for the hot training Safi Joseph Jr. and doing an exceptional job. Yeah. And she is coming in off of that near loss. She was only beaten the neck on December 12th. So here's the question I have, Joe.
Okay. Yep.
She had been entering in a mile race. Is that right?
Correct.
And she is entered to race on Friday at what distance?
Going 5/8. Now, she's a horse that she broke her maiden going 5/8. We've kind of always talked about stretching her out, and she ran a bang-up second that day at Gulfstream Park West. But unfortunately, we've entered that mile race in the last condition book. We entered the claiming 50 non-winners of 2 lifetime. So we've tried multiple races at that distance that haven't been able to go. She's ready to run, and I got to tip my cap to Safi Joe, because I can only imagine as a trainer, working as a groom, having a horse that's ready to go, keeping them, ready to be race ready, and just not being able to have that race to keep her in shape and being, just kind of ready on command when a race goes. He's done a tremendous job. So ultimately, the race is there. She needs to run. She's won at the distance before, and you see her. She's set as a 7-5 morning line favorite. So I think she's spotted in the right spot. In a perfect world, if it's going a mile, would we be ultra confident? Absolutely. But I think she's a horse that can handle the 5/8 distance, no problem.
All right. 7-5?
Morning line 7-5. Drew the 8 post, 8 of 8. So it looks like a great spot. And she's ready to go. So let's hope it's a productive day.
For me personally, I guess the question I was trying to get at to you was, as she had been pointing to a 1 mile race and been entered at least a half dozen times. Now all of a sudden you say, well, we've got a 5/8 race. We better go here. So what goes into the trainer mindset as far as how she trains? Does she train the same, or does she train differently, knowing that now she's going into that 5/8 race?
Yeah, I think we could see from previous times when she was getting ready for that 5/8 drill, or that 5/8 race, when she broke her maiden, you saw Safi give her a blowout 3/8 a couple days before to kind of get some speed back into her. Given the circumstances, he didn't quite have as much time to prepare. But she's a horse, even when she was prepping to go a mile for the first time, she wasn't a horse that was working, 6 furlongs or consistently working 5 furlongs. She's a lighter frame filly. She stays pretty fit. So she doesn't need to train as hard in the morning. And you see that pretty typical with horses in the Florida area. Those horses aren't quite as often on that 7-day work pattern like you see in California. So you don't see that all the time. But everything with her, like I said, Safi's had to work with what he's been given, and I think he's prepped the horse perfectly with what he's been given.
Yeah, I would agree. I have no knocks on what he's done. These are just obviously open questions that I had.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we're at the mercy of the condition book, because it's like anything else. You get to a point in which a horse is fit, but at what stage do you have to say, okay, well, I got to scale him back and try and get this horse sharp? And I'm sure that in the gallops that she has going into the race, I'm sure that he will audibilize accordingly.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on. I wanted to mention, of course, Naismith, and quickly, let's touch on his workout. We don't have the footage from February 8th. Actually, we could have pulled up the workout from January 27th for those that missed the show last week. But to tell me, and I know I was right there with you, tell me about his most recent workout, his first quote-unquote 3/4 drill in company on February 8th. Just, was it February 8th?
It might have. Yeah, February.
9
And what was it? Can you confirm? Was that his second or first 3/4 work?
It may have been his second. The one I'm showing here is February 8th for being his most recent 3/4 drill.
Okay, so I think he had one after there going 114 flat. It was a 3-horse work out of the gate. They were not stablemates. They were from the Ganbat barn, if I'm saying that correctly. I always am a tough one on that one. But he broke from the outside of the 3 horses, broke sharp as ever, and he had the lead. Ryder took a hold right away. Juan Espinoza, who was working him that day, and what Richard Mandel word for word said, he was just toying with those horses. The best part was in previous works, he was a horse that he probably would have just run off from those other horses, because he has that natural ability and speed where he could have. He took a hold of the bit, relaxed under Juan, cruise going into the turn, and then when Juan let him run, right about the quarter pole, he kicked on nicely down the stretch. There was also Clocker Gary Young that was up there. We were talking about him leading up to it. And he said for that horse, for him to be the most successful going on is him figuring out in his head. And after that work, he looked at me and he said, progress right there. So it's definitely an improvement work from him.
Yeah, so now I'm actually seeing it here. It wasn't listed on the Thorough Manager program. So it was a 6 furlong workout, Valentine's Day, 114, handling out of the gate. So it was nice to see that he had that stamina-induced drill, and that workmate that he had that kind of jumped into him was probably inferior from a talent standpoint. But I thought he was very professional in the sense that he set back and he was able to sustain some momentum to the wire. Very, very efficient drill. So he enters tomorrow, correct?
Correct. We'll enter tomorrow for that main special weight, going 6 furlongs on the turf course.
All right, perfect. Okay. Naismith, thank you for that. All right. Well, last but not least, let's take a look at the one and only American Heiress. I know that she has quite a following. She is a British-bred daughter of American Pharaoh out of the mare Kirtana. And her most recent workout is going to take us to, we've got some other questions here we'll be happy to answer. And Mara Zeman, thank you for tuning in. Let's
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're having some technical difficulties with Sarge. He'll be right back with us. But we're going to tune in. We'll get to all those questions that everyone has, but we'll take a look at that American Heiress work while we have it. This was actually her first half-mile drill for Team Pletcher, her third drill. And it looks like we got an old video here. So, Hannah, if you got a chance, if we can research for American Heiress, her most recent drill was a half-mile going 48. But this filly's really come along well, I'll say, since she's hit Palm Beach Downs with Todd Pletcher. She's caught my eye since day one. I talked about it on last week's show. She's really forwardly going in her training, competitive, wants to just go right after her work. And she's done everything right. She does have a little bit of that turf action that we've talked about recently. But she's a horse that she's trained great on the dirt as well. So it's a horse that, as we see her continue to progress, that's going to ultimately decide, and we'll leave that to Todd Pletcher where she's going to make her debut, whether it's turf or dirt. But she's a horse that has a load of ability. And Hannah, if you can't find that next video, let's just play that last 3/8 work, and we can show that one again. Perfect. Here we go. Now we got it. So American Heiress is on the inside. She's working with an unnamed filly out of the dam, Ready and Good. And you'll see her. She's on a tight hold from her exercise rider right here. And she's pulling hard early throughout. I thought the best part of this work to me, compared to last week when we look at her last week's work, was the gallop out. I kind of gave her a little critique when I was nitpicking her work last week, as I wish I would have saw her gallop out a little better. Even though, she's early on in her training, she's only had 2 3/8 work going into this one, and that was her second 3/8 work last week. But you'll see here, she's competitive as well, and she gallops out a lot much better here. And you'll see here, look at her rider. Her rider's hands are real tight into his chest. She has a lot more in the tank here. You'll see, 49 and 1 here on the final time, but she easily could have did this in 48 and change or 47 and change if you really let her run. But at this point in her training, you don't want her to do that. She still, has a lot to develop fitness-wise. She has a lot more to go. So to me, this was a perfect work, and there was a lot of positive reports from Team Pletcher here. Nick, do we have you back?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you a little bit. We're still a little staticky, but I can hear you.
Strange phenomena. Okay.
Hey, I'm happy I'm on the other side for once. Usually I'm the one leaving you hanging, but I'm glad it was you and not me this time.
No worries. Just a check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Watch your analyses here as we've been moving forward. So this was her second half mile, correct?
First half mile, third official work. We lost him again. But to confirm, that was her first half mile. She had 2 3/8 works leading into that, and you'll see them turning for home here again. Nick, I got you back. You look clear.
It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing, this home production. Okay. I actually liked her work this week better than I did last week.
Absolutely.
And because of the fact she dropped her head a little more, and I felt that there was more effort to being put forth. I mean, last week she was kind of held up and did things with confident ease. Whereas this week, I felt like, she was asked to do a little bit more, but responded.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is my favorite part. Last week, on her gallop mate or her workmate, galloped kind of out right past her. Today, she saw that workmate, didn't want to let her pass her. I still think she has a little bit ways to go fitness-wise to really get under her. But like I said, she's early on in her training. It's still her only third official work. But I was a lot more happy with the gallop out this week versus last week.
All right. And then once again, we will, this isn't the last one, by the way. We still have the horse that we wanted to introduce, and I wanted you to touch on Edge Racing and a horse by the name of Yes This Time, who started first time for the Edge Racing Group on January 21st with a really nice fourth place effort trained by Kelly Breen. Touch on Edge and what the current process is. We're going to take a look at Yes This Time with a recent 5 furlong drill.
Yeah, so my racehorse recently acquired Yes This Time for the Edge Racing program. The Edge Racing program is going to be more of, higher percentage shares. It's going to be a smaller ownership group from a number standpoint where we can get in at 10% and get a owner's license, things of that nature. We're going to look for horses all around the country from Florida, Kentucky, California. The type of horses that we're going to look for are going to be in that 75, 100,000 range. So not quite what you may be used to at a regular basis in my racehorse. And for example, Yes This Time we privately purchased him off a maiden win. We paid 100,000 for him. And here he is. He's on the inside. I know the screen says outside, but he is the chestnut on the inside. And I was really pleased with this work. It's something here where you see times and you ultimately think, 104 and 2, this couldn't have been a good work, right? But when you see the work, he's got 2 workmates on the outside of him. He, to me, is going the easiest. When you look at those riders on the outside of him, those horses are getting asked. His rider's pretty well in hand, gotten nuggled along a little bit, but not too much. And you see the horse on the outside ends up getting a 0.2 of a second faster time than him, where, he did start a little bit off the pace. But visually, to me, I thought he worked the best of that trio.
Well, it's interesting because we talked about the January 21st race, and the workmate that he had there was Zippy Baby, who finished second out of that common event and was claimed by Kelly Breen, a horse that had raced in the Grade 2 Pilgrim. Was third in the With Anticipation. But, I'm not trying to sound like a homer, but I'm with you, Joe. He did definitely look and appear to be the best of the trio. So just to confirm that, Yes This Time is on the inside of this group.
Yes, we got the rider with the white helmet cap on the far inside. The gray on the outside is actually Zippy Baby. They were the second and fourth place finisher on that January 21st race. And they are both going to come back and race against each other in the same starter allowance condition on February 20th at Gulfstream Park, race 7, I believe. So, Yes This Time drew post number 5, and it looks to be a pretty good spot for him. So we're expecting another improvement. It's going to be a second race at Gulfstream Park. He's acclimated now and seems to be doing really well.
He looks great. He's maintained his flesh, and I think that, from a physical standpoint, I think he's the type of horse that's only going to gain experience. So the contact information was there for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out for Joe Moran in reference to Edge Racing. And, of course, you can email edge@myracehorse.com. I know there were some other questions, and in the midst of the grid or whatever it may be up where I know I'm not in Texas and know it's not snowing outside. But we appreciate you bearing with us through those technical difficulties. But, Joe, you did a wonderful job. Chris Grabowski, music from Alaska. That can't be his last name. I'm just kidding, Chris. He basically is asking that question: what is Edge Racing? So, in a nutshell, what is it, Edge Racing?
Yeah, Edge Racing. It's going to be another ownership platform where my racehorse, you're going to get that fractional ownership at fractions as low as 0.1%, 100%, hundredth of a percent. With the Edge partnership, we're going to be offering shares at 5-10% level, where you'll have 10 to 20 people per group, and there's going to be more expenses involved. The price, obviously, at that 10% level is going to be much higher. Owners will be responsible for their share of training bills that will be offered on a quarterly basis. Each account will be reconciled on a quarterly basis, but it's going to be offered more as your traditional partnership per se.
All right. That was perfectly concise. Thank you, Mr. Grabowski, for that message. Mara says, what criteria do you use to determine when a horse needs to drop in class? I'll defer to you.
Yeah. I would say there could be a lot of variables that go to this question. And sometimes when you see a horse dropping in class, it could be a little bit of a game, right? A trainer and ownership. In this game, you got to win to make money. I'll always say that. Running second's good, but getting that win is crucial for these animals. So to me, when you're dropping in class, it's time for the horse to get his confidence up, put him in the best spot to win. And for me, that's the best time to drop a horse. But, there's always other reasons horses get dropped. For example, like a good horse that I'll bring up into consideration would be Daddy's Joy, right? Ideally, we didn't want to drop in class from that first condition allowance race, but with that race not going, we had to consider claiming 50 non-2, which is considered a drop in class. It puts her in for a claiming tag, but that wasn't the perfect scenario. You weigh out all your pros and cons. If she wins, she gets claimed for 50. You're generating a good amount of money. And what's better, not running or running third in a first condition allowance race, continuing to pay bills per month where she can be productive in a race like that? How much is she really worth? And if she wins that race and moves on to the next level, is she good enough to be a stakes competitor? So you really got to weigh out the plan, where the horse stands in their training, and all those factors play a major role.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's a great question, but there's so many prongs and ebbs and flows to that, in a sense that, you consider the late great John Henry. Early on in his career, he was a bona fide run-of-the-mill, cheaper claiming type, and a career that evolved in which he earned in excess of $6.5 million in a time where that money earned would probably be in excess of nearly 20 million in today's world. He won 39 races from 83 career starts. But, the other aspect of it is the physicals. There's some horses that as they get older, they might be a little arthritic. They generally need a class drop. But one thing I can greatly appreciate, Joe can attest, is with the My Racehorse model, as we've found with horses that were racing at one point. Nihilist comes to mind. He no longer, it wasn't as if he had severe lameness issues. The horse had feet, he had chronic abscesses. But at that point, in which we all realized that would it be best for the horse to give him, another career, it was determined at that stage of the game. So there was an onus of responsibility at My Racehorse. But what constitutes a class and drop in class? Generally, I think the real word there is to win. And it's much like, shooting a basketball. And, whether you shoot from 20 feet out versus 10 feet out, I think we all know when you're within 10 feet, it's a lot easier to score.
Yeah, 100%.
Right. All right. Shirley Eli, she says, what does it mean best turned out for horses? Is it like best in show for dog breeds?
Yeah, if you're referring to like Santa Anita, they offer the best turned out award usually on a stakes race, or you'll see on TVG. They have a few sponsors that offer that award. Exactly. They're usually picking the horse that they see that comes in dappled out, looking the best in the flesh, and looking the best. So ultimately, that's what I would say. It's just like a best in show for dog.
Thank you, Shirley, for that question. And, obviously at Santa Anita, the best turned out, brought to you by My Racehorse. I'm sure many of you have heard that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. And I always say it's one thing to be the best turned out, but it could also be the best looking horse. So you have to kind of differentiate between the two, because I've seen horses that were the best turned out and the best looking that weren't very fast. So but you know what? The pride is involved, and you see horses braided up, and you see them diamond out with the curry comb. And for me, it's awesome, because the groom pays a little extra attention. As a former trainer, there were times though, I liked it when a horse looked like he had a perm. So I would request the groom. I'd say, hey, can you braid that horse up? And we'll pop the braids out race day. And he comes out and he looks as if he's got the soul glow. And I think it's pretty cool. The women, especially when they see horses that they have that little extra dazzle. Mm-hmm. And Chris O'Dell in the quarter horse world, he actually puts a little bit of glitter in their tail, which I find crazy that it's legal, because lights come down and you see the shimmering tails at most times. You check it out. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I remember growing up as a kid, whenever I'd see those horses, they'd have the braided hair. I always thought it was so unique and cool. And I said, wow, that groom does a pretty good job. I couldn't imagine doing that. And I always used to see the first thing a jockey would get on, and he would rip those braids right out. And I always used to wonder when I was a kid and, a little bit younger and not as experienced, I said, why would they do that? So much work got put into that, and they rip it right off. And then you quickly learn that they need something to grab onto just in case, and they'll rip those right out. But it's something that even when I worked as a groom, I never had the ability quite to do it myself, but I had a groom that I worked under named Hector, and he always used to do that to all the horses, and he loved to do it. And it definitely is a pretty look.
Remind me to tell you the story, speaking of braids, on a horse that Gary Stevens was riding for Bob Hess back in the early 90s. And if I remember correctly, I think her name was Run Lightly. There was a story about the braids and the baby oil. You'll get a big kick out of it.
Okay, I'll make sure.
Perhaps I'll save it for another show. Yeah, I wish, James. My hair is doing its thing, but no perm. But if I had, Joe could probably get away with it.
No,
we could style him up. That would make for a fun show on its own right. So, and Desiree DeVries, the Asmussen's braids still look first time. I agree. I actually like the braid look, but I get it when it comes to the riders.
Yeah.
They need something that they can grab onto. So,
yeah.
Prefer them having no braids.
Yeah.
For race. You don't want your rider falling off because he can't get control of the horse. All right. Well, last but certainly not least, we've got our scorecards this week. I think this is a great idea. Neither of us know what grades we gave, and we can briefly touch on this, but I want to thank Hannah Bloom for offering up this idea. I think it's a brilliant idea. We worked and talked about the workouts. This is what our third Wednesday work show. So let's take a look at the scorecard. Scorecard, report card, scorecard. All right, so Joe, there's your scorecard. And is it safe to say that your favorite work this week was Daddy's Joy?
I guess it would probably be between that and American Heiress. Again, I liked American Heiress's work a lot, but Daddy's Joy, I guess, from a progression standpoint and seeing her works, I thought this was one of her better works, and maybe it led to that, to giving her a B, but she was probably one of my favorites. I don't know if I can truly pick between her or American Heiress, but those were probably my top two works of the week.
All right. I like it.
Yeah.
I think I actually, watching that Yes This Time drill again, I would have to say that he might be my favorite work because, we've seen him and you and I have talked about him. I could have probably given Yes This Time a B+ for sure. Now, in regards to Daddy's Joy, I must say in our pre-production meeting, you and I had to touch on this. Mm-hmm. And you looked at me funny, and you have every right to, because we kind of looked at it from a different perspective. When I saw her work, and granted, we could always go back and look, but we could end up running the show for another hour. But for me, I thought she looked a little bored, noting a little bit of neck lather. I guess my impression is maybe because Safi Joseph has been kind of keeping her on point for an extended period. It's a very difficult thing to do when you've entered a horse X number of times. I felt she was bored. The neck lather bugged me just a tad, so I gave her a C+. Carpe Vinum, I would have wanted to see a little more acceleration, although she may have been waiting on that rival. I think she's capable of better, although the work wasn't, again, I'm fine with the workout, don't get me wrong, but maybe I expected a little more from her, knowing that she's had, multiple drills since that last race. Tizamagician, he's the pro's pro. American Heiress, it's either her or Yes This Time were our favorite works of the week, but I'm going to give the nod to Yes This Time. So what was your favorite work then, all in all? American Heiress?
Yeah, I would probably say American Heiress was my favorite work. Of course, I'm a little biased to Yes This Time, but I guess I like the cool part that I like of seeing Yes This Time is the uniqueness of a 3-horse work, right? Whenever you get to see that, it's a little more race-like. You really get to see that competitiveness versus even a 2-horse work. That 3-horse work, it's almost like a little match race coming down the stretch, and I really like the idea of that work, and you don't quite see it as often. We touched on it, I believe, on the last week's show. We talked a little bit how trainer Phil D'Amato did that a lot during the summertime when I was at Del Mar. I would see him do that a lot with 3-4-horse works with younger horses. So I thought that was unique. But yeah, I'd probably stick with American Heiress. Really like the way she's progressing in her training. I think she's only going to get better with more time.
Yeah, and by the way, we added Yes This Time within the past 24 hours or so. So essentially added into the mix. So good news is I think they all looked healthy, sound. Trainers doing a wonderful job. And, Carpe Vinum, maybe I would have liked to have seen her maybe break behind another horse and have a target essentially. But it'll be interesting to see because I know he's in Phil's in a little bit of a holding pattern with her, thinking about, okay, which direction are we going to go? And that's why he probably kind of slipped her into autopilot and said, all right,
Yeah.
let's get her through this work and then maybe get a little more serious next week. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Okay. Joy McReynolds. Hi, Joy. All right. Welcome to the Wednesday Work Show. Nick Hines, Joe Moran. On a yearly average, how many times will a thoroughbred race?
Great question. I think it's going to vary horse to horse ultimately. I think from a statistical standpoint, the most recent study that was done, I believe it's 6 to 8 times is the yearly average if a horse will race. I don't mark my words on that, but I believe it's a pretty safe assumption there if I'm not incorrect, Nikki.
Yeah, I think that, again, it depends on the level, right? Yeah. And again, we pride ourselves at My Racehorse in a sense that, we 100% defer to the trainer. We're not in a position where we tell them essentially what to do. You must run here. It's different with a claiming horse. Claiming horse will generally race more. In the standardbred world, I covered a horse a couple of weeks back that won his 100th race. He's a 12
Oh my goodness.
Didn't race 100 times. It was his 100th victory.
That's incredible.
And granted, they're warm bloods and they're standardbreds, but for the thoroughbreds, I mean, quite frankly, Joy, back in the day, for a thoroughbred to race 16 times during the year was not uncommon. In today's world, I would say that average, I'd say the overall average is anywhere from probably 6 to 8 races. I think 8 races would probably be about right. Make sense? I think so.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense to me.
All right, Joe. Well, I don't know about you, but I enjoyed the show today quite a bit, although my apologies for the audio technical difficulties.
I'm just glad you came back because I was sitting there for a second and I was like, where am I going to go with this? I wasn't prepared for it. So I'm glad you ended up coming back strong.
I knew you would bring me back, Joe. When the show started and the light shone brightly on you, I felt uplifted.
There we go. That's what I like to hear.
All right. Well, don't forget, we've got the upcoming works for next week. And I know that we're going to add to this list a couple out at Santa Anita tomorrow, Tizamagician, Bella Chica, and then Carpe Vinum on Monday. I know that entries are taking place. Naismith enters tomorrow for Sunday. Yep. And Storm Shooter, his race didn't go, correct?
Correct. That did not go. I believe if I remember correctly, Todd Pletcher said from the comment I read, it wasn't going to go again the next day, but they're hoping for Thursday the 25th. If that date's right off the top of my head, but they're expecting that race to hopefully go for that day. So another similar situation to kind of Daddy's Joy. We've entered a handful of times. Granted, when you really look at the time between races, it's still only been just over a month now. So it's not a concern yet, but he's ready to go and we'll be ready for that race.
Yeah, it's always when you're anticipating something, and it's kind of because this next race for Storm Shooter coming off of that runner-up effort in Stakes Company, his next start, I think is going to be very telling of what the future might hold. But big shout out to Jason Wright, Mike Matto, Mara Zeman, Joy McReynolds. Appreciate all of you tuning in, and feel free to tell your friends, even if you aren't a shareholder at myracehorse.com. Perhaps you can get invested and get involved. Not only the fact that we've got Edge Racing. Best of luck, Joe Moran, with Edge Racing. And yes, this time competing this weekend out at Gulfstream. I know that you're going to take the red eye. And, we'll be looking forward to any updates that we'll be getting from Edge Racing. That'll do it for. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was going to say just one more thing to note for those, just because I know we put Thursday down for Tizamagician's work tomorrow. Don't be alarmed if he does not work tomorrow and they push it back to Friday. Team Mandela said, they're going to try to keep pushing back slowly to get him on that Saturday work pattern leading up to March 6th. So if that work doesn't come through tomorrow, don't be alarmed. He will work in the coming days.
All right, Vicky Kennard, I too am learning. I'm learning the joy of live programming, if you will. And all the years that the TVG, of course, spoiled. It's a different time. It's a different era. But I truly enjoyed it. And a big thank you to our director behind the scenes, Hannah Bloom. So we look forward to the weekend, and hopefully you do as well. Hopefully we can find ourselves in the winner's circle, but more importantly, staying safe and healthy. And whatever you do, stay vigilant. So next week, the Wednesday Work Show, we're working on potentially getting a clocker guest involved. Not sure which one. Don't hold us to it, but we're always evolving here at myracehorse.com. This is Nick Hines saying Until next time, we'll see you in the winner's circle. Joe Moran signing off on this Wednesday work show.